Hello everyone, and welcome to today's orientation for prospective applicants to the 2014 Community Arts Education Leadership Institute, or CAELI. I'm Ken Cole, Associate Director of the National Guild for Community Arts Education, and joining me today are John McCann, the Director of the Institute, and three alumni, Joanna Massey, Director of Schools Programs at the Wild Music Institute at Carnegie Hall, Mike Norris, Director of Education at Hyde Park Arts Center in Chicago, and Yolanda Wisher, Director of Arts Education at Philadelphia Mural Arts Advocates. Our goals are today, for our orientation today, are to brief you on the CAELI and the outcomes that it's designed to produce for participants. We'll also talk with you a bit about the components of the program, characteristics of compelling applications, and you'll hear directly from our three alumni about their experience of the Leadership Development Institute and the impact that it continues to have for them back home. Before we begin, let me mention that the webinar is being recorded and that a recording will be posted on nationalguild.org by the end of the week. So you'll be able to go back and reference our conversation today. The orientation today is scheduled to last an hour so that we have time for your questions. And due to the large number of participants, your lines have been muted. So to ask a question, please use the question box in the upper right corner of your screen. Type it in there, hit the submit key, and that'll pop up here on our end. We'll pause midway through the orientation to respond to questions, and we can pause again at the end if need be. So before we launch into the orientation, we want to take a couple quick polls so that our panelists can get a feel for those of you who are listening in and perhaps shape their comments accordingly. So the first thing that I'd like to ask is the role that you play at your organization. So which one of these best describes you? CEO, Executive Director, Program Manager, Director of Education, or Marketing Communications, or Development? CAELI has had folks from all of these different areas participate over the years, and we'd like to get a sense of who's on the phone with us today. So we'll take just a couple of minutes. And, one of our participants said, I do all of those things. I don't think that's unusual, but yeah. And I'll ask my colleague James now if we can show the results. Okay, so about 40% of you are executive directors, a third or so are program managers, quite a few are directors of education, and we have some development directors on with us too. So welcome everybody. My next question for you guys is, have you had a chance yet to speak with one of our CAELI alumni? There are now 100 out there in the field, and we'd like to know if you've already had a conversation with one or more of them about the experience. Let's just take a couple minutes to see the results come in. Okay, and James, let's see how that's doing. So a few of you, about 20% have, but most have not. So thanks very much, everybody. So this is your first chance for many of you to hear directly from an alumni about the experience. So we're glad that you're with us today. I'm going to turn things over to John McCann in just a second, but first I wanted to say a few quick words about CAELI, why we feel at the Guild that it's so important to our field, and what we hope will happen for those who participate. So several years ago, about 2008, we conducted a needs assessment of our more than 400 organizations across the field that are members of the Guild, and we found that fewer than 11% of executives at these institutions had ever received any sort of leadership training. And I think most of us on the call today would understand and agree with that leading a nonprofit arts education organization with all of its many moving parts and many constituencies, the students, the staff, faculty, trustees, not to mention partners and funders and other stakeholders. Leading all of those folks is a complex challenge. And bringing these folks together, folks who sometimes have competing agendas, to move things forward around a common agenda can be a tall order. Yet this is what arts education leaders must be able to do if our field is to successfully achieve our overarching mission of ensuring that quality lifelong learning opportunities in the arts are accessible to all Americans. So that's why we've, at the Guild, have invested so heavily in CAELI over the years, so that we can help you, our leaders in the field, whether you're emerging or have been around for a while, we can help you succeed in this, what we think is a tremendously important endeavor. So with that, John, welcome, and let me turn it over to you and ask that you take it away.
Thank you, Ken, very much, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I just want to say on behalf of all of us at Partners in Performance how honored we are to collaborate with the Guild, and how happy we are that CAELI is now going into its 5th year. And Ken mentioned, I think, at the beginning of our time together today that there's 100 of the alumni out in the field, and you know, it won't be long until there'll be 125 of those. So we hope that many of you will choose to join us for the program for 2014. Just a couple of things. I think this is a program that is quite different in character and in feel, I think, and in design than many workshops or seminars that you may have attended over time. It is a program which has 4 very distinct yet very mutually reinforcing elements, and I'd like to just talk about those 4 elements briefly before we turn to our panel of alumni who will walk through that journey that each of them have had today. The first element of the program is really critical, and it's about stock taking, and the 360-degree feedback process is quite simple. It's really where you invite 10 to 15 people from your circle, people that you work with, to comment about you and your own leadership within the organization, and with their feedback that you receive before coming on to site at Bryn Mawr for the second element of the program, it really gives you an opportunity for you to understand the perceptions around the ways in which you work that are contributing to the outcomes the organization is getting, and it also gives you guidance on what areas that you might want to focus on. Our belief, and I think it's borne out each year, is that that allows you to come into the 5-day seminar at Bryn Mawr in a very intentional way. So with that feedback in hand and as a guide, we then start in late July our 5 days together at Bryn Mawr just outside Philadelphia. I can't say enough about the beauty of the campus. It's a pastoral setting, and it's a place where really deep work can really be enjoyable. So we're very blessed to be able to be on the campus each year. The time there is highly interactive. There's a lot of experiential work that you do, a lot of work with one another, and we have 6, I think, just esteemed and very wondrous faculty members who serve as guides over those 5 days. And at the end of that period, what we anticipate that you leave with is something that's very critical, and that is an individual learning plan or an individual development plan that really allows you to take stock of what you learned through the 360-degree feedback process, what you've now learned through engaging with 24 other folks over a 5-day period, and from the guidance and provocation that has come from the faculty members. You now array what you would like to work on as your leadership development priorities into your individual learning plan. That plan then serves as your guide into the 4th and very critical element of the program, which is individual one-on-one coaching that you would do in the period between August and December. And the way the coaching works, or has worked in the 4 preceding years, is about every month you have an hour-long discussion with your coach where you're able to describe activities that you're participating in, which is really testing out some of what you've learned and how it may play out in the real world. And you're beginning to learn a lot from those experiments in the ways that you're beginning to try out in working. And the coach provides a real ally in you being able to understand how you might want to modify that, how you work with the kind of feedback and the learning that you're receiving from working with other people. So the coaching is really an integral part of the program. So beginning with the 360-degree feedback, where you learn a lot about your work from the people you work most directly with, 5 days to really take a deep dive into what that feedback is telling you with the good guidance of the faculty, and also the benefit of having your peers around the table with you at Bryn Mawr for the week, and then coming out of that with a pretty rigorously developed individual development plan that guides you through the coaching, which then would happen through August through December. So those are the four, again, mutually reinforcing elements of the program, and I think is what gives it its distinct character and also makes it quite different than many workshops or seminars that you might attend that are about management practice or even about leadership development. And we're really excited today to have the three panelists on with us, all of which have completed the program. And Mike Norris from Chicago, from the Hyde Park Art Center, will go first, because Mike, you just finished the program less than a year ago, so maybe you could just kick us off by talking a bit about your journey. And what we will do after we hear from Mike is turn to Yolanda, who finished the program in 2012. And then for Joanna, my goodness, it seems like ages ago, who did the program in its inaugural year in 2010. And what we would urge you all to do as we go through this is just through the chat box, just send us the questions that are coming out to your mind, so that once we hear from Mike, Yolanda, and Joanna, we can turn to your questions and make sure that this time you've invested today is really the most useful for you and most targeted to where the areas are where it would be most helpful. So with that, Mike, how about kicking us off?
Great. Thanks very much, John. Thank you for that introduction, and I'm happy to be here today. Oh, look at that. There's a picture of me. I'd like to start by just saying thank you for having me in the CAELI program. It was an extremely valuable experience, something that as many educators and program people, leaders from around the country probably go through. I had never really taken time to actually step back and examine my part and my role as a leader. So through the first couple conferences that I went to before CAELI through the National Guild, starting to be exposed to more and more best practices and people from around the country. By the third year, I really actually felt like I had developed relationships, and I developed a leadership style along the way that was actually kind of ready and ripe for the CAELI experience. So I just thought I'd throw that out there for anyone considering the program as something to kind of keep in mind, is that you probably started your path towards something like CAELI without realizing it. And you might, if you're like me, you might be in a perfect position to actually make the most of it. So my experience came, mostly from a background of not having any formal leadership, training at all. Like many people in nonprofit community arts settings, I'd consider myself, if anything, a rogue educator of sorts, a person that has, responded and planned based on my vision and my needs and the community needs that I work with, as opposed to maybe some best practices from outside the larger landscape of community arts education. So this was a perfect opportunity for me to step back, and it started, the arc of the week really started with, as John mentioned, a reflective practice that involved my peers, submitting information and feedback on how there's another picture of me, sorry, on feedback on how I was perceived and how my actions, translated to the people around me. That sort of introvertive start to the week really opened up gradually to discussions that involved other people and their challenges, other exercises, leaders that are there as part of the CAELI experience, ultimately to a much broader scope of what is out there and what our best practices are when it comes to leadership. Something that isn't quite a rogue or outsider thing anymore. It very much is I would say a large part of the field is the research and the sharing that happens. And then ultimately finishing the week with, coming back to my own practice and reflecting about who I am was just a really valuable sort of arc to follow throughout the 4 or 5 days that I was there. I would say that the week did kick off with me kind of reflecting on how I lead myself as a starting point to how I lead others. And that was something that I think, I never quite considered pointedly, or at least that focused, in that focused a way. And that was helpful for me not to just confirm some of the decisions and actions that I've taken over the years and what I value, but also to kind of identify a couple areas that constructively were super helpful for me to kind of focus on and understand, whether it be defining who I am as a person or as a professional. That introvertive sort of reflective practice was something that, you don't really get a lot of time to do. And so making that time, inside of this particular experience is something that I can't stress enough in terms of the value. I think of the word renewal when I think of CAELI. I think it certainly applies. And I think of renewal not so much as a leadership tool, but actually as a leadership responsibility. I think it's something that I've taken from the program because it helped me kind of reinforce that even though I've always valued the practice of making time for my own purposes, for my own development, inside of my work hours, inside of my work schedule, I really got to confirm that it's not just something that I have to, loosely plan for. It's a responsibility that I have to my community, that I stay as alert and as fresh and as invigorated as I can when it comes to trying to lead the people, and whether it's the students, teachers, staff, the many people that I oversee here at the Art Center. So that responsibility and that renewal is such a heavy part and an important part and a uplifting part of the program that I tend to stress and have come back with. I always feel like reflection is something that might not be at the forefront of what we do every day, but it has such practical applications that making time in my day, it's not every day, but in days that I can, making time to step back and think about what I do, think about things like the value of questioning, my decisions, the value of asking good questions to others in addition to myself, is something that really balances the idea of what we probably do a lot of, which is advocate and really try to make cases for why things might have to be a certain way, or why your vision might have to be a certain way. But again, that listening skill, those questioning skills, as part of the other side of the scale to really help balance out the way that I approach every day has been a super valuable tool that I've taken away. I would say also these visiting professionals that came either as coaches and as workshop leaders, but also as alums from the program towards the middle end of the week. Some alums came in, we got to hear from them speak, we got to break out with them in groups, and that sort of real-world component allowed us to really take abstract concepts more and more throughout the week, take abstract concepts from, theory and discussion to actual practical purposes and people. Is something that I think separates this particular experience from maybe others out there, although I don't know too many others that are like this. And that relationship, those relationships that I've built with alums, with coaches, with people from the National Guild's CAELI program and larger network, I would say has been a great experience for me to sort of drive the trust that and relationships that I've built with people here in my community. So it's been a nice extension of the relationships that I've both developed in the Guild and in my day-to-day job to sort of complement each other. Leaving the program at the end of the week, I would say I felt I had a strong connection with the people there. I had a strong connection with myself, I would say, on a personal but also professional level, and that's something that I'll always sort of take with me, and that I actually took this tool away. It's a very simple thing, but the idea of looking at my shadow every day, I shouldn't say every day because I'm in Chicago, so I never see shadows. But when I do, you know, probably a half dozen times since last summer, I've been either waiting for a bus or, you know, in some nice place with sunshine, and being able to look at my shadow as a tool of kind of like a stripped-down version of me without anything else, just kind of like examining the core value as who I am, is this really valuable thing. You know, who am I? I'm more than what I represent here at the Arts Center. I'm a professional and a personal, you know, I'm a driven person that's driven by core values as opposed to simple values that I might represent for others. And that sort of conversation is, has been driving me, you know, in times of need through whether they're challenges or successes, you know, to really know who I am, know the impacts that I have, and understand how they fit into the larger field. So, you know, I don't think I could say too much more about CAELI except that it's a super positive experience, and very much, you know, been worthwhile for me.
Mike, I wonder, just before we go to Yolanda, if I might just pose a question that a couple of people have posted here about the experience of the 360. I think if we had polled at the beginning around this question, we'd probably find out that many people haven't had that experience before. And I think the question is basically got two parts to it. One, how would you describe the usefulness of the 360 feedback in your approach to the CAELI program and your just approach beyond that? So did you learn things in it that you found were useful? And the second part of the question is, did you find it as a positive experience? Because I think the question embodied in the question is whether or not this is sort of a negative critique of weaknesses, or was it a more helpful observation of behavior that you could then decide on where you wanted to make any changes? So 360, how helpful was it to you? And if you might describe it from sort of a positive-negative continuum. And then we'll go to Yolanda.
Sure, and I've never done something like this too, so I should mention that this was my first time. Overall, I would say it's absolutely positive experience. The act of, even before the CAELI experience, reaching out to peers around here and requesting their participation to give feedback kind of actually connected me on some level with people around me. Before I even got to CAELI, I'd sort of reinforced some relationships, you know, oh, you really value what I want to say, and yeah, I do, and I want to hear what you know, you think of my work and my decisions and how I work every day and how I lead. So even before it started, those relationships that I had with people around here kind of got reinforced by that value. I would say close to phone book-like results that that each participant receives when you get there were very enlightening. I would say 3/4 of the responses confirmed what I already knew. The rest, the remaining 25%, were very valuable insights into you know, the decisions that I make every day and how I lead every day. And I would say they weren't at all negative. They were very constructive. I took them very constructively. Maybe that's the CAELI experience that cultivates that sort of you know, atmosphere, but I didn't at all feel like it was negative. I didn't at all feel like it was something to harp on. You know, frankly, it was just like, oh yeah, I could see working on those couple things, and I could see how someone might translate, you know, the way that I might, you know, act or carry out something without maybe considering other people's points of views once in a while. Not that I do that across the board at all, but you know, some people pointed out some instances, and I didn't at all take them negatively. I actually, you know, maybe it's, again, a testament to CAELI. I felt like it was the environment to kind of sit back and reflect, and nothing didn't make sense. Everything helped. You know, if and when I ever need to, and I have a couple times, I can pull out that report here and kind of sit down and go through it, and it's been nothing but a helpful tool.
Mike, thank you very much. That was just terrific. So that responds to that question, and there are some other questions about coaching and the like that we will move to a bit later. But I'd like it, if we could, to turn to Yolanda. Mike, you finished the program just this past year in 2013, and Yolanda, you were with us in 2012. So what about your journey?
Well, I would say my CAELI journey has been invaluable to me. unlike Mike and I think Joanna, I was really, really new to my role as the Director of Education at Mural Arts. And I was also really new to the field of community arts education, especially as a leader. And so the training was really timely for me. It probably didn't come soon enough because I was familiar enough about my role to know what I didn't know. And I was still fairly indecisive about whether or not I wanted to lead in community arts education. And I would say, all in all, CAELI fortified my decision to keep on working in the field and to really see myself, to gradually come to see myself as a leader. I really needed the time to think and grow outside of just the hecticness of the schedule, the work schedule that I was experiencing. And particularly because I had come from being an English teacher for 10 years, which was such a different kind of day for me, from the hours, from the role expectations, from the kinds of leadership tasks that I was expected to kind of handle. I really needed something to ground me in this field and the strategies that could help me be successful. And what I found was that I didn't come away thinking that I didn't know anything. I was really affirmed by what I already knew about leadership. Had already kind of, I think CAELI made it visible how many other areas in my life, just as a parent, as a teacher, as a coach, as an artist, I had been leading and using strategies that were very the work that I was doing at Mural Arts. And to really value that and to bring those learning experiences into the work was something I learned at CAELI. I really appreciated that the strategies that were passed on to us were grounded in personal values and things like courage and authenticity that were really important to my work and sometimes I felt were at odds with the goals of the organization and kind of the things that, the challenges that we faced in the field. And really kind of finding a group of people who were upholding that, celebrating those values, saying that those were absolutely important to the success, my success and the success of the organization really resonated with me. That it started, I appreciated that the training started within, as Mike mentioned, with the reflection rather than, you know, here are all these best practices from around the country of what you should be doing. It was very much grounded in what you were already bringing to the training. Mike also spoke about the 360 being very positive. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I was a little haunted by the comments that I got right away, and I had to kind of wrestle with myself just about, as a leader, how important it is to be able to receive feedback and constructive criticism openly. I learned was such a huge part of leadership, and I think the 360 really prepared me for that and made me really hungry for the feedback of the people who I was leading, the people who were leading me. I thought it was really helpful to get those two sides. And to hear that feedback was, you know, hard, but it made me really think about how I also gave feedback and being really honest and thoughtful about that, and also being really compassionate. The inquiry-based approach at CAELI, I think, which kind of undergirded the curriculum, was something that was really familiar to me just because it's something my son is involved with in his preschool curriculum. So I was kind of interested in this idea of what it meant to stay in inquiry. And from a child's kind of curiosity point of view, which makes the work so much more fun when you're in that frame of mind, but also in terms of just making smart decisions as a leader and what it means to ask questions, and as Mike said, ask the right questions, and taking the time to find the data that will help you make more thorough decisions and make more compassionate decisions. And to be a better listener, I think, really came out of that inquiry-based approach. I keep going back to the reflection piece as well. It was really, really important, how valuable that is, how necessary it is for leaders, and how there's so not that kind of space within the culture of our workplaces. So that really affirmed for me how important it was and how important it was for me to be able to influence the culture of my organization. The fact that CAELI even made me think that I had the power to influence the culture of my organization was a huge transformation I experienced. going in thinking I was just under the gun and under a lot of pressure, and coming out feeling very restored and rejuvenated, and really kind of eager to get back in the work, and to use what I had learned to become kind of a better leader, but also a better person, how those skills keep translating into the difficult conversations I have to have even outside of the workplace, and how I can avoid and learn from the pitfalls of hard conversations is something that I continually think about, and how to keep carving out time for this kind of reflection and the communal kind of conversations that went on with the peers that were gathered there is something I continue to reflect on, continue to keep dispersing. One thing I'm always kind of harping on with my staff, and I remember coming back from CAELI and having a ton of exciting ideas that I tried out on my staff, and some of them we still use. A lot of the icebreakers we're still integrating into just the way we work. A lot of the activities are really important to just creating that collective voice. But this idea of what it meant to be the first follower was something that really stood out to me. And being a leader, but also being the kind of leader who can get behind other leaders. And it really got me, I think CAELI overall got me outside of my head, which I think is so much a part of the work that we do as leaders every day, and to really have that kind of aerial view, but also I would say a heart view of the work.
Yolanda, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And one of the questions that posed is about your response to the feedback that you received. So let me just read the question as it's stated here on the screen. So it's a question for Yolanda. Were you not as open to feedback before you experienced the 360? And now after you've had that experience, which you talked about here is really valuable and constructive for you, are you now open to, and do you request feedback more regularly as a result? So the question is, how did the 360 experience influence the way you view feedback and maybe seek it out these days?
I think I was open to feedback, but only of a certain kind and of a certain framework. I think I would probably have wanted to control it a little bit better. And I also came from kind of a feedback of, an English teacher responding to a student, or the feedback you get kind of in performance reviews on your teaching. So thinking about leadership and all of the kinds of characteristics and personality traits that go into leadership, some of that stuff I probably wouldn't have put on the table to get feedback about. And so that was what was so interesting about the 360. It was this really well-rounded picture of how these parts of yourself that you may not think are at play as a manager or as a leader are really on the table and really influencing the way other people are able to do the work or relating to you. I do think it's made me much more open to feedback. I think probably my staff gets a little tired of me asking for the feedback, but I feel like I've tried to make that kind of opportunity to speak back more part of the framework of how we do meetings, how we do brainstorming. I think is really important because it's made me want to be more conscious of the fact that I'm making the mark that I want to make and that I didn't miss it. And I think that's what I've valued about the feedback. And it does require a tougher skin, but I absolutely welcomed it, and I've been able to use that skin to much value in the work that I'm doing.
Yolanda, thanks very much for responding to that question. We appreciate it. And we'll turn to Joanna Massey. And Joanna, you were with us in 2010 and actually have had quite a shift in your own work since then, because I think when you went through the program, you were at Jazz at Lincoln Center, as I remember, and now you're at Carnegie Hall. So from what you can remember, even though it's been 4 years ago or so, talk a bit about your journey with CAELI, please.
Sure. I guess I should have a college degree now, 4 years later. Yeah, and I have actually been in two positions since participating in CAELI, and really are using so much of that experience in the work that I do now. So I currently work, as John mentioned, at Carnegie Hall. At the time that I participated in CAELI in 2010, I was working in the education department at Jazz at Lincoln Center. And I had been in my position for about 5 years and had grown from much more of an autonomous role, managing programs, into a leadership role and assistant director position with direct reports, as well as a large team of teaching artists and consultants. And like Yolanda and Mike, I had not participated in any formal leadership training. And I think what really drew me to CAELI was the opportunity to have some straight up leadership training, but also being in an environment that is really targeted towards arts educators, which was very appealing to me. At that time, I had also recently attended my first Guild conference and was really impressed with the Guild as an organization, and also with the people that I met at the conference and the level of conversation. So all of that was a draw for me. I think another draw for me, and something that I was thinking about a lot at the time, is seeing a challenge, really a problem, with leaders that I was working with or interfacing with who were in leadership positions, maybe because of a content expertise or seniority with an organization, but that weren't people who really necessarily cared very passionately about leadership. And I think because it was something that I was so interested in, this was an opportunity to really think about our responsibilities when we're in those leadership positions. And lastly, I would just say that my organization, as I'm sure many on the call experience, was changing pretty significantly and growing quite a bit. And so in addition to feeling like I wanted support in developing my own leadership skills and thinking about the leader that I wanted to be, there was also a lot happening within my organization and thinking about how I might contribute to that work. I also, at the time, and would just say and encourage other folks who are in these types of situations, I was dealing with several challenging relationships within the management structure, including managing someone who on my team who was about 15 years older than I and had been in the field and organization much longer. So I was definitely looking for strategies around managing some of those relationships. I think just in terms of time and in terms of not repeating a lot of what Yolanda and Mike have said, because I certainly second much of what they've shared, I just want to talk briefly about 3 key areas of takeaway for me from the experience and talk a little bit about how each of those areas continues to play out in my work today. The first area is around communication and developing my communication style. The second is around peer learning and the opportunities that CAELI provided to really have support from peers and learn from peers. And then the third is just around risk-taking and thinking about how we take risk as leaders. So, and I'll just speak briefly about each 3. First, communication. There's this great quote. I don't know who said it, but I attribute it to CAELI, and I used to joke that I wanted to hang it on a sign in the front of my desk. But the quote is that listening is more than just waiting to talk. And I love that. I love in thinking about our listening skills. I remember talking quite a bit at CAELI also about the idea of listening with the possibility to change. Listening with the idea that, as leaders, we don't have all the answers, that it's okay to not have all the answers, and that the onus is on us to really work collaboratively and to be, listeners as much as we are talkers. And so when I got back, I remember making quite a significant effort to listen more closely, sort of to listen to what was being said behind what was being said, and also to ask better questions. I think, as others have said, the emphasis on questioning and the quality of questions that we ask, both within our relationships and also within our programming, I think is something that I still think about quite a bit. And I do still refer also quite regularly to some of the templates that were shared around planning out for difficult conversations, doing some reflection around how conversations went and how you might have listened better. So I really do feel like my communication style and the way that I listen and interact with others was really impacted quite deeply. The second area that I would just touch on is the opportunity for extensive peer learning that I think CAELI provides. You know, everyone who participates is looking to become a better leader, but within the group and the cohort, there's also this commonality of working, of course, in the field. And so whether it was conversations about programming or thinking about identifying our core values and how they impact organizations, you know, a lot of those conversations happen through the lens of our field and the uniqueness of our field. So I think that's just a really special opportunity. That being said, at the same time, folks come from really different parts of the country with different backgrounds and really different size organizations. You know, I at the time was running a very small middle school academy, but within a very large cultural organization. And so it was wonderful to be able to sort of see the snapshot in the field and recognize that, you know, a small community music school is grappling with a lot of the same issues and asking a lot of the same questions that I am in my work. And I did see, I think I saw a question online about whether participants are still in touch, and I can say from my end, yes, very much so. There are some relationships that developed there that have really been impactful for me. And then lastly, just around this idea of risk-taking, I remember a lot of conversation during CAELI around the types of risks that we have to take, you know, as leaders and just in life. And through the 360 feedback process and through the conversations and reflections both at the Institute and after, I really felt encouraged and empowered to take more risks. I know that certainly contributed to my decision less than a year later to actually take a new position as the sole arts person at a large youth development organization leading up a national after-school initiative, which is a very different type of work for me professionally. And in my current role here at Carnegie, I also think a lot about risk-taking in terms of our programs and the work that we do, whether that's you know, reaching young people through the juvenile justice system or maybe programming something that artistically is outside of our wheelhouse. I see sort of that programming work as very related to the personal work and thinking more flexibly. So I'm sure we're getting a little short on time, so I will wrap it up. But I do feel that that I'm much more flexible, both personally and professionally now, and I would attribute, you know, much of that to the learning and relationships that I gained at CAELI.
Thank you, Joanna, very much. And just a quick follow-up. You mentioned that you still utilize some of the templates and all that you got through the program. And one of the templates that people have asked about in the questions is about the individual leadership development plan and what form that takes. I would only say that it is extremely simple what we ask people to do with the 360 feedback in hand. And at the conclusion of the 5 days together at Bryn Mawr, we ask people to basically respond to the question of all that you now know and all that you could focus on, where do you want to put the emphasis over the next 6 months? And around that, you will develop this compact with your coach that you will be able to discuss with them in 4 sessions over the next while, the progress you're making, the setbacks you're feeling, the ways that you're growing into managing this new priority that you develop for yourself. So that template in itself is very, very simple. It is a matter of you sifting through all the things that one might do and deciding on what the areas you want to focus most directly on are, and then you and your coach talking about how you will pursue that. And then there are 4 coaching sessions over the period that follows on from the 1st of August through December. Joanna, one question for you, if you might. A question, I'll read it just literally from the screen. Did Joanna have any difficulty getting supervisory support for her CAELI application and participation? And if so, how did you meet the challenge? So what was the discussion within the organization about the time away, about the cost factor? So could you just speak ever so briefly to how you brought the organization in as an ally to support your participation in CAELI?
Sure. I was actually pretty lucky in that while these sort of opportunities typically, particularly within such a large institution, typically would be reserved more for an executive level or senior staff, I had a lot of support from my direct boss, who believed very strongly in professional development for the team. And so actually that was not much of a challenge for me. I did have to write up a proposal for for some of my superiors in terms of what I hoped to get out of the experience, and also was in touch with them quite regularly during the process. But no, it wasn't met with much resistance, and actually had a fair amount of support, which was great.
Great, thank you, Joanna. That seems like, Ken, it would be a really good segue into the process. If someone is predisposed or interested in CAELI, what would make a compelling application, and what are the lessons that we've learned about that? So, Ken, I'd like to just turn it back to you if I could.
Sure, thank you, John, and thanks everybody, Joanna, Yolanda, and Mike for sharing your experience. Very helpful, I think. So questions about what constitutes a compelling application, who is CAELI right for? And I think I will say real quickly that this is not tied to age. We've had participants as young as, I'd say, probably 25 to folks who are in their early 60s participate. It really is more tied to where you are in your career development, what you need in terms of your own leadership development, and whether the time is sort of right for you as a leader, and whether this is the right fit for you. So I think if you're, the application consists of a statement of interest, which is 1 page, a resume, which we ask you to limit to 2 pages, and a letter of recommendation from your CEO or board chair if you are an executive director. And I think through those 3 pieces of information that you will, documents that you'll submit, it's important that you communicate that you understand clearly what CAELI's, what the leadership development outcomes that we intend for participants are. So to make it clear that you understand those, and that's in fact what you are looking for. We want to know about your personal developmental goals and how those 2 things align. So in the brochure or on the website, there is a piece that lists the developmental goals very specifically for CAELI, and it's important to reflect on those and think about, are those right for you? We're also looking in the application to ascertain what your commitment to the field is, and the impact that you've had through your work thus far. So how do and I will say there's a panel of individual independent reviewers who work through each of the applications and make recommendations to us, and they're looking for some evidence of your commitment to the field. So if you just entered into the field and this is your first year or even second or third year, you're going to be going up against people who've been in the field a bit longer. So if you were in that kind of situation, we might also look at your education, and did your course of study in college or grad school, for example, support your work in the field? Does it indicate an interest in the field? But we want to see that through your work experience and or educational experience. We're looking for evidence of impact, and so I think when you're putting together your resume, you want to communicate not just the activities you engaged in or the things that you were responsible for, but the results of your work. So did you, for example, make the organization more productive, or enhance the quality of the work, or bring people together through your work to address a common challenge? That's sort of evidence that can be provided through the letter of support and your resume, and even in your statement of interest. We want to know that your organization supports your work, and I think that's very important for your recommender to state, and state explicitly in their letter of recommendation that they understand that you're going to need, in the 360-degree feedback process, you're going to need your peers, your direct reports, the people to whom you report, to provide feedback, and they'll need to participate in that. You're going to be out of the office for the better part of a week, and for the seminar, and when you get home, you're going to need time to work with your coach, the wonderful Mary Parrish. You'll have 4 coaching sessions, and it's not just the time that you spend with her on the phone, but it's also the time that you spend preparing for that or responding to the coaching session. So, you know, you'll need time to do that and to continue your leadership development back home. So, and that's all spelled out in the brochure as well. So, again, important that your recommender understand that and commit to that. They may or may not commit to paying your registration fees or some portion of that. I think that's a significant sign of support. And finally, we're also looking for how concrete ways in which you'll share the benefits that you derived from CAELI with your peers, your colleagues back home. And we've seen people do report outs in staff meetings. We've seen people invite CAELI faculty members to come and speak to their organization or to a network of organizations with which they're involved. We've seen them share their experiences in writing with the broader field. And but how are you going to take what you learned here back home and pay it forward, if you will? So that's what we're looking for. I think we have, I know we have a few questions that have come in, and I just want to check on time here. We have about 8 minutes left, so let me just try to take some of these questions now. I think we had a few questions regarding the coach, but I say we will have one coach, Mary Parrish. Her bio is on the Guild website. You can go there, just search on CAELI, and you'll find the link to her bio. She is terrific, and if you'd like to talk with somebody who's been coached by CAELI, by Mary, I think you could contact James Horton here in our office, and he can put you in touch with an alumnus to do that. And somebody had asked, is there competitive component? Participation in CAELI is limited to 25 folks a year. We think that's very important given the nature of the Institute, that it be fairly intimate. We do receive generally between 50 and 60 applications each year, so it is a competitive process. We are very happy here on the staff end to talk with you about that and to speak with you for you to get a better idea of whether it's a good fit for you if you still have questions after this. And to provide some tips for you if you have questions about how to craft compelling applications. So, John, I think that is those were the questions. We did have one other about whether you had to be a member of the Guild in order to participate, and the answer is no. That participation is open both to representatives from member organizations and to non-member organizations. Fees for non-members are higher than they are for members, as you might imagine. And I will say that, many folks who come from non-member organizations go home and talk their organization into joining the Guild. So, but you do not have to be a member. It really is open to the entire field. So, John,
yeah, Kent, there was one question that I thought I would just take maybe 30 seconds with about what the week together, which is the second of the 4 elements we talked about, was like. So I would just briefly describe it as the days start with breakfast available at about 7:30 or 8 o'clock. We officially convene at about 9 every day, and we work until about 5 or 6. And I would say if you wanted to think about that time, you could think about 1/3 of it, I would say, is the faculty working around what I might call practices and provocations for us to really contemplate. About 1/3 of it is what I might describe as activities and experiences that you're doing based on those practices and provocations coming from the faculty and working with the peers in the group. And about 1/3 of the time is reflective, and that would be in many different forms. It might be that you're working one-on-one with another participant in the program. It might be that you're sitting by yourself or in a small group with Mary as the coach, or it might be that you're really alone with your journal, just sorting through a lot of what you're hearing in relation to what your 360-degree feedback has told you. So that's about the way the week shapes up, and we usually have, as Mike I think alluded to, free time in the evening that is often participant generated. So about a third of the time really hearing from faculty around practices and provocations, about a third of the time in activities with your peers, and about a third of the time in some form of reflection either with other folks, with your coach, or working by yourself with your journal. And then there was a question, Ken, also about CAELI folks getting together after the program and staying connected. I know there have been some official ventures into that. We had at the conference last year some 22 or 23 people out of 100 who gathered for a couple of hours in a session of really talking about the influence the program was having. And I also find when I'm at conference and just other places, I find members of CAELI who are really seeking one another out. So it happens in both sort of quasi-official ways, and it happens, as Joanna referred to, in ways where people are merely seeking one another out at conferences and other times. And I know Jessica in our office reports that many people are staying in touch through social networks as well. So Ken, I just wanted to briefly respond to those.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I think that issue of having a peer, a cohort of peers to whom you can turn, is one benefit that the program can provide for folks. And we've seen people staying in touch in many different ways. John, you mentioned folks, gathering at our conferences, but they've also created, email, Google groups and that kind of thing. They've gotten together over phone or when they're visiting each other in different cities. So people really have stayed in touch. And a leadership position can be a lonely position. So having relationships, productive relationships with your peers across the field, I think is it's very important, and it's one of the things that strengthens not only the participants but the field as a whole. And so I think that is that's a tremendously important part of all of this. So I think that we have gotten to just about all of the questions. If you had one that we haven't answered yet, please feel free to contact James Horton. James, I don't know if we have your contact information up there. It is. But we'll leave this slide up for a few minutes, and you can get in touch with James to ask questions directly. And I believe we also put contact information for each of our alumni who shared their experiences with us today. So feel free to reach out to any of us with questions. Thank you, Joanna, Mike, Yolanda, and John for doing this with us today and sharing your experiences. Thanks everybody who was listening in. We hope to hear from folks, and again, if you've got more questions, don't hesitate to be in touch. John, any last words?
No, just thank you and James for all the great work that you do, and thanks to Joanna, to Mike, and Yolanda for contributing their time today. It's been a great discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Good. And watch your inboxes, everybody, because we'll be sending you a little evaluation form in the next hour or so. So let us know what you thought. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.